if you wanted to leave with like an introduction, or I just go ahead.
Oh,
No questions. Yeah.
yeah. I'll just start talking and you can interrupt me.
Awesome.
Essentially, I'm Titania Jordan. I'm the Chief Parenting Officer at Bark Technologies. We help keep close to 7 million children safe across the nation online. We have an app, we have tech that schools use, we have hardware that can be used in the home, and then we have a safer smartphone for kids. So, all that said, we did not build a smartphone because we felt that more kids needed smartphones than were already getting them. But we knew that they were getting them and they weren't going to stop getting them. And we knew that the ones they were getting weren't safe. So we decided we should build a safer one so that parents did have that option if and when it was time for a kid to be able to communicate, explore, learn, etc. Now, the issue of phones in schools. First of all, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? Now that we have this hindsight, that we allow children to have these supercomputers in front of their faces, on their bodies, while they're in a place trying to learn, not be distracted, communicate, build relationships, build empathy, instead of report people and bully them, right? It makes a lot of sense now. And so we as adults who now see the light are working very quickly to remove that element of distraction and abuse in some cases, in many cases. So it's absolutely wild that it really has spiraled this far. And I understand why it has, right? Because you can't expect teachers to be smartphone police. They're there to educate.
Yep.
It comes from the district, it comes from the administration. And then if and when the district administration does believe that smartphones in school are an issue, it also takes the parent. It takes the parents to say, we agree with you. We're not going to give our kid an unsafe smartphone or one that will distract them during the school day. Or we're not going to be texting them and contacting them, causing further distraction. And it's a collective problem, but it's not the kid's fault. We can't expect them to regulate what is a very real addiction.
Wow. Everything you've described is what I've experienced also being a middle school teacher. And it's basically a fight between the student's attention and the use of technology. And then we're sitting, okay, how can we enforce it? Where does I think you drew the lines, and I think the developmentally appropriate smartphone, not like these super high tech where I see that they're not using it to what you and I are using it for. Yeah, how do you regulate them? They can't regulate themselves. Impossible.
Yeah, we can't expect them to. That's not reasonable.
So my question is, when did this initiative start with combating, I guess, the mental health crisis with regards to these phones? Can you expand on that?
Wow. Well, from my vantage point, Bark started in July of 2015 because our CEO, who's a dad of two, his name's Brian Basin, was actually working at Twitter at the time. So very skilled engineer, CEO, was literally working at one of the biggest tech companies in social media and saw the landscape of what was happening with kids and realized there was no great way to keep his own child, with him being in the know, safer online with a connected piece of tech. So he took the big risk, left Twitter, started Bark, hired our CTO, Brandon, who's a dad of two, hired me, I'm a mom of one, and we set out to use AI to analyze children's digital signal, text, email, social media communications, and then send alerts to parents and caregivers when there were issues. And once we rolled out our product and started seeing how many alerts were being sent around very, very severe issues like suicidal ideation and predation, disordered eating, violent sexual content, drug-related content, you name it, we got a firsthand look at this epidemic. But up until that point, all we had to go off was, data from the CDC or news reports, or certain whistleblowers that might write an op-ed. We don't really have a lot to go off of.
In the email that Adina sent, it talks about the part about how enforcing it, but how do we do it when not being on the same page? Because I've sat in these meetings, so I have a very good insight, and this is where I also push back. You have district administrators, the board, and then us, what we're reporting, and there seems to be no consensus, and then the parents. So how do we start, now that we let it go this far, how do we backtrack that to a starting point with those parameters that I think you mentioned in your introduction? So how do we go from literally chaos and disagreements to creating a foundation that makes sense about cell phone use in schools?
Yeah, right. Well, the good news and the hopeful news is that many schools and districts have decided this year we are going to be a phone-free school. So this will be the first year that I think we have a critical mass of data to showcase how children in phone-free schools that actually implement the right way to do it are healthier. Their communities are healthier. They're happier. Attendance is higher. The rates of a variety of issues are decreased. You are going to see communities that embrace that thrive, and then you're going to see the communities that don't continue to decline. And that alone will reinforce what many of us already know. I'm very, very grateful for Jonathan Haidt and his book, The Anxious Generation, because that was the tipping point. That was the catalyst that woke people up. Anybody who wasn't already on this bandwagon of like, wait a minute, we've got to change some things. It woke everybody up. And now, if you are not part of that movement, you're probably going to regret it.
What are the next steps for maybe parents getting on board a little bit quicker? Is it, oh, there's a mandate on a national level to make phone free? Like, how does the conversation start so it's cohesive? I don't know if it's too specific or if you mention it, because that's the part where I want to make sure I know where my kid is. And I'm like, we didn't have cell phones, and we knew, we have like that before and after. So how does that get a very productive, inviting, and it's not antagonizing? Because I think sometimes that's the reactionary response. So how do we get new initiatives?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, it's top down and it's bottom up. You've got to have legislation at the national level, at the state level, that's working to make kids safer online, like the passage of COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, that just passed the Senate and is now on its way to the House. So awareness and action is happening, at the very top levels. And then from the bottom up, it starts with parents like me. If their child's school is not phone free, going to the school, not in an aggressive way, but in a like empathetic way. Like, I get it, this is a big problem to tackle, but we can't not try to tackle it. And here are some resources, and here are some ways that we can go about doing this. Whether it's using the Yonder pouch to put phones away for the day, whether it's making sure kids don't have unsafe smartphones. For example, with the Bark phone, you can lock it down. You can make it a dumb phone for the day. You can track your child's location. There are ways around this, but it's going to be a collective effort. It's not just going to fall on one person's shoulders, and it has to be enforced. You can't say we're a phone-free school and then let kids have phones out in the hallways and not have ramifications for it, and etc. And then, as a parent who has a child in a school, I have to look introspectively at like, am I texting him when I don't need to be? Can this conversation wait? How am I negatively contributing to this distraction culture? If it is truly an emergency that I need to get in touch with him, I could just call the front desk of the school, like we've done for generations, as long as phones have been around, right? And even in the extreme cases, extreme emergencies, let's say, God forbid, there is a school shooting threat. I get it. Parents want to be able to talk to their kids, and they want their kids to be able to communicate outside of the school, but it's a distraction factor. A child cannot fully focus on the adult who's giving them guidance on where to go and how to stay safe in an emergency if they're texting, if they're on a phone, right? We need everybody's attention on the adult that tells them what to do and where to go. And you as a parent have to put your fear and desire to communicate with your child ASAP aside for their safety and everyone else's safety.
And as far as the Bark phone, because that's one of the things that I did find prior to this interview, how can we get big brands that make these sophisticated phones for Apple, for Samsung, and that kids are very brand aware, which I think it's been this online exposure that they talk about it, but without having a adult perspective that these things can be obtained, but it takes effort. It's a privilege to have a tool, not a toy.
Right.
Now, have there been recommendations and pushback when we say, because parental features, there's a lot of options. And parents, some of them who are techie can get by and do it because they're familiar with it, because their line of work somehow, if they're working IT, not a problem. But if it's someone who doesn't have maybe the budget or a phone that can, because my phone is older, my kid has a newer phone. So how do we also navigate? It's a devil's advocate, but how do we navigate and tell cell phone providers to make this? Or is it a list of recommendation of parental apps that are easy to use and easy to implement, and they don't require like the latest and greatest technology? Something like that, I don't know.
Yeah. So it's a layered approach, keeping your kids safer online and just healthy physically and mentally overall in a tech world. It takes a lot of work. It's not just press one button, everything's fine. It starts with a relationship. It is very important that you and your child have open, candid conversations about a lot of the things that honestly our parents either never talked to us about or didn't until we were much older. So open, candid conversations, your kids knowing that you're a safe place is critical. They can come to you with anything without retribution, and your first course of action isn't going to be to yell at them, punish them, or take away their access. That's very, very important. And so it starts with a relationship and then expands to the tech. You can do easy free things like not allow connected tech in the bedrooms at night or behind closed doors. That mitigates a lot of the risks that can happen overnight, including kids not sleeping. In addition to that, most everything that your child can access today has some element of free built-in parental controls, whether it's time limits or filters. So whether you have a new or old iPhone, there's screen time that you can set up. If you have the Google suite of devices, there's Google Family Link. The internet service provider that brings internet to your home, you pay them every month. Guess what? They have filters and time limits that you can set. Even in games that your child plays, like Roblox, for example, there are parental controls that are free that you can turn on so they're not chatting with strangers. So it takes some work. You've got to Google whatever your kid can access, plus the words parental controls. Figure out what is offered that is free, turn those on. And then if you do have the means, if you can afford something like Bark or something else, please use it, because while there are a lot of free options for time limits and filters, there really isn't anything out there like Bark that analyzes the content and context of the child's digital signal and then sends you that alert to let you know, hey, here's what's happening, here's where it's happened, and here's what you can do about it.
Sounds like Bark reminds me of what school districts have when they have Chromebooks or iPads, and basically what it does for the administrators, everything is visible, nothing is hidden. So it's basically working like that. So it's something comprehensive as Bark, or we're doing that. And as far as now that you talked about top down and down up, how are tech companies responding to these set of recommendations? Is there a pushback? Are you being made an example of because you're not, they grew up with the technology, we didn't. But where's the balance? Like, are social media companies taking proactive measures to do it, or they don't? Guess would be my next question. Given the facts.
The top social media platforms just over the past year alone generated about $11 billion in revenue just from children. They're for-profit entities. So while I know that there are a lot of caring humans and parents that work at these companies, as a company, they're prioritizing profit over child safety. And we have multiple examples of that. In fact, I was just at a conference, the Global Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation, and David Erb, ERB, spoke last night, and he was a senior engineer at Meta and surfaced to Meta some things that they needed to do and that they could easily do to reduce the amount of predation happening on their platform that is affecting kids. And they decided to not move forward with his recommendations because it would sacrifice growth. And so that's where we are. The big social media companies will roll out safety features that I think that they think look good enough to like check a box and look like they're doing something, but they're not effective. They're not doing enough, and they're not going to do enough unless they're forced to by updated laws. The current laws that were meant to protect consumers online haven't been updated since 1998. So that's where we are.
So you seem to have something in common with people that you associate with, or you're having a working relationship. They were part of it, and then they leave because of what's their inherent practices. So
yeah, they feel like their conscience gets so loud that they can no longer be a part of it.
Totally. What do you expect now from everything that we've had a conversation? So what are the things you expect to see initially once these preschool phone bans? What do you think is going to be sort of the first hurdles, and what are going to be sort of the success stories that we can maybe expect? Or I don't know if it's too soon to ask that, but what do you expect as far as implementing it? Is it going to start to curb the bullying, the self-harm, and the attempts of suicide? Because we know that you mentioned Meta. We've seen the hearings, parents in the company. So what can we expect from this new initiative?
Yeah. I will say you will see almost immediately, by immediately I mean over the next 2 to 3 months, in the schools and districts that implement phone-free policies that actually are enforcing, right? The communities are going to be healthier and safer. Those rates of all the bad things that are happening to kids are going to drop. They're going to be healthier. Attendance is going to improve. Grades are going to improve. You will see that pretty rapidly because you've removed the poison and they can heal. In the communities that don't, it will continue to get worse. And so I have a lot of hope that we're going to see the lives of children improve. And the more and more attention we can pay to these use cases, these early adopters that are doing the right thing and the best thing, the better and the faster this change will happen. It's just like the cigarette industry. The more and more people that realize what cigarettes were doing to our bodies, the more we woke up and decided to say no. So
sort of the same thing. What's unfortunate is the age in which they started getting exposed to it, which is, and they knew. That's why they designed it the way that they did. When it comes to, I know you've mentioned Bark, is it accessible at a national level, or how do they acquire the device? Since it was mentioned, it's probably a good recommendation to put forward since it has what I would say tech industry does not want to have on a phone as far as those features that make profits of $11 billion.
Yeah. So the Bark app, which can be put on a variety of children's devices and connect to over 30 different social media accounts and text messages, etc., that's available in the United States, South Africa, Australia, and Guam. We cannot wait to be available globally, but we are a team of 100, and so we're working hard on that. The Bark phone, the smartphone, is only available in the U.S. right now. But we're working with a few international opportunities to try to bring those to other places as soon as possible because parents are begging us to bring the Bark phone to their country. The Bark for Schools offering is also available in the US right now. And then the Bark Home, the hardware that goes in the home that helps to regulate TVs and gaming consoles, is also US only right now.
Oh, okay, so you guys are looking at possibly expanding, but that's a work in progress. We could say that.
Yes.
Okay. I guess final thoughts. Why is it important, this topic of conversation that we've just had as a couple of takeaways? Why is this so important? Why do parents, schools, administrators need to get behind these initiatives? Takeaways.
I mean, if you care about children being healthy, physically and mentally, this is the biggest threat to their physical and mental health, is their unfettered, unmonitored tech access. So we need to do something about it. They can't regulate it themselves, they're children. The adults that have created it and have purchased it and have given it to the children have got to do the right thing and take care of their kids, just like we make them wear seatbelts and sunscreen and take them to the pediatrician once a year.
Totally. Perfect. I think I have plenty. It's a very fascinating conversation. I'm super happy that Adina and you guys were flexible to set it up because it's what I've been talking about a lot, and I've seen the harms of it as a teacher and the conversation, the attendance, all of it. It's both right there. And so